The chaos of the VIP lounge was a symphony of celebration. Voices and laughter ricocheted off the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering Chicago skyline. They were toasting Leo, the son born of an affair, for his successful coup of Sterling Enterprises. And in the same breath, they were mocking me, Ethan, the rightful heir who had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. I had been publicly disowned, cast out after coming out of the closet, an act they painted as a fit of madness. Their jeers about my foolishness hung in the air, thick as the cigar smoke. I remained silent. They weren't wrong. Before all this, I had been brimming with a reckless courage, convinced my love was strong enough to stand in the open. I was ready to propose, to build a life with him hand in hand under the sun. Yet, my beloved Caleb was seated right beside Leo, his silence a deafening condemnation as the others ridiculed me. Someone raised their glass, the amber liquid catching the light. Their words slurred with victory, remarking on how Caleb's contribution to my swift demise was undeniable. Another chimed in, sarcastically pitying Caleb for the ordeal of flying back from his studies abroad just to help Leo. The consensus was that the honey trap had worked brilliantly. Their laughter was a raw, grating sound. They raised their glasses again, and Caleb lifted his as well. The sharp clink of crystal against crystal echoed the sound of something inside my chest shattering into 1,000 infinitesimal pieces. I kicked open the door to the lounge. The cacophony died instantly. My gaze locked onto Caleb. Without a second thought, I grabbed a heavy whiskey bottle from a nearby table. I asked him to explain himself. Caleb said nothing, his face a ghostly white under the moody lighting, frozen in his seat. A man with wire-rimmed glasses stood up, sneering that there was nothing to explain. He taunted me, asking if I truly believed Caleb could ever be interested in me. He declared triumphantly that I had been played. He called me a lovesick fool, his voice dripping with disgust for my preference for men, and told me to accept my defeat and crawl away. I didn't hear the rest of their slurred insults. My focus was entirely on Caleb, waiting. Finally, his voice, raspy and low, confirmed my worst fears. He murmured that he thought I was smarter than to ask a question I already knew the answer to. It was an admission. Everything they had said was true. I took a deep breath, testing the weight of the bottle in my hand. It was solid, thick glass. I swung it, and it connected with Caleb's head with a sickening thud. The handsome side of his face was quickly obscured by a crimson mask. The room erupted. Figures surged forward to restrain me, but I fought back with a feral energy I didn't know I possessed. I blocked a punch, kicked out, and sent bodies stumbling. I was knocked down but scrambled back to my feet, grabbing anything I could. Glasses, more bottles, a heavy fruit platter, and hurled them at my attackers. Time blurred. Eventually, they kept their distance, a wary circle of bruised and bleeding men. I heard someone mutter that I had gone insane. Most of them were simply howling in pain, cursing me as a degenerate, a pathetic sycophant. I wiped the blood from my eyes, my left arm hanging limp and useless at my side, and walked out. As I left, I thought I heard Caleb call my name, but it could have been a hallucination. The world tilted, and the last thing I knew was the cold, hard pavement of the alley. When I opened my eyes again, a kind, smiling face hovered over me. He introduced himself as Julian. He and his husband, he explained, were on a cross-country road trip and had found me collapsed by the roadside. The way he said husband made me instinctively glance at his features, the short hair, the strong jawline. My gaze was blocked by a formidable figure stepping into my line of sight. It was my first time seeing Marcus, and for a disoriented moment, I thought I was looking at a grizzly bear. His voice was a low rumble. He asked me if I was desperate for cash, fighting so recklessly. I used to have more money than I knew what to do with. But after being thrown out of the Sterling family, and having spent the last of my savings on a proposal ring, I was indeed broke. I nodded. Marcus looked at Julian, his expression shifting to one of comical distress. He whined to his husband that they'd picked up a penniless one. The contrast between the hulking man and the sugary, whining tone he used was jarring. Julian was a gentle soul. I spent 3 days in the hospital, and during that time, I told him the story of my 30 years. It was a simple tale, a life of privilege and success until I turned 29 and met a man I mistook for my destiny. I told him how I'd bravely come out, only to discover I was the punchline to a cruel joke. I hadn't shed a tear for myself, but Julian wept listening to my story. Marcus, the doting husband, shot to his feet, declaring that Julian shouldn't cry, and that he would go kill the man responsible, saying it as casually as if he were ordering a coffee. Julian calmly stopped him, reminding him of his promise. Marcus immediately became docile, dutifully reciting his mantra to be an upstanding citizen and do honest work. Julian patted his head like one might a large, obedient dog. Julian invited me to go back to Paris with them. Marcus was especially enthusiastic, insisting he needed my business acumen after I'd helped him untangle a snarled contract proposal he'd been agonizing over. He said he couldn't let a talent like me go to waste. I agreed. There was nothing left for me in Chicago but mockery and pity. My father was already playing happy family with Leo, the son he'd kept hidden for decades. There were no ties left to bind me to that city. I was ready to leave right then, but Julian insisted on a little ceremony. He told me not to rush, that he had to take his big idiot to see an art exhibit, and that I deserved to leave with my affairs in order, clean and unburdened. I considered it and told him honestly that there was nothing left to pack. Besides the condo, everything I owned had been seized by the family. Julian patted my arm, his touch reassuring. He told me to take 3 days to get clean. So be it. The smell of antiseptic in hospitals always dredged up memories of my mother. She had languished in a private care facility after the shock of Leo's existence was revealed, eventually dying alone. I couldn't stand being there a moment longer, so I checked myself out and returned to the condo. It was the last thing I had, a prime piece of real estate I'd bought specifically for Caleb and me to share. It would sell for a handsome price. I was mentally calculating its market value when I pushed open the door and saw him. Caleb was on the sofa, his face etched with exhaustion. He managed a faint smile when he saw me, as if the betrayal and violence were all a bad dream. He asked where I'd been and offered to make me dinner. The sight of him was nauseating. I walked past him and went straight to the kitchen. He followed, a palpable sense of relief emanating from him as he shadowed me like an oversized puppy. He called me by an old pet name, one he used when he was feeling particularly affectionate. Looking back, I realized how easily lies and sweet nothings must have rolled off his tongue. I turned and threw a punch, catching him square on the nose. I didn't hold back. He didn't flinch, taking the blow without a word. A small, unnerving smile playing on his lips even as blood started to drip from his nostrils. He asked if I felt better. He knew I'd be angry, but he clearly believed I'd eventually get over it. My year of absolute devotion must have made him forget what kind of man I was before him. It was my own fault. I tilted my head and hit him again, harder. The impact sent him stumbling back into the kitchen doorway, his head cracking against the frame. He slid to the floor, still smiling that infuriating smile. He asked if I wanted to go out for dinner, reminding me of that rooftop restaurant I'd mentioned. I had mentioned it, 2 days before, after being cast out by my own father, I'd scraped together everything I had, even borrowing from acquaintances, to buy the ring. I'd planned to book that very restaurant to propose to Caleb there. In my foolish fantasy, I would tell him that even though I had lost my family and fortune, I could rebuild it all as long as I had him, that he was all that mattered. I was thankful now that I never got the chance to say those words, to make an even bigger fool of myself. Now, the only thing that mattered was money. I needed to sell the condo and the ring, liquidate everything, and start fresh in Paris. A hand grabbed my pant leg. Caleb looked up at me, his handsome face marred with fresh bruises and dried blood, a pathetic and desperate look in his eyes. For a fleeting second, I remembered the first time I saw him at a dimly lit speakeasy. He was all lean muscle and sharp angles, his white t-shirt doing little to hide the powerful physique beneath. I was drawn to him instantly. I'd approached with a drink, planning a clumsy spill to get his number. But he'd swayed unexpectedly, and my cocktail had drenched the front of his jeans instead. The thrumming noise of the bar seemed to fade away. The way the fabric clung to him was almost enough to make me reconsider. But then he hooked his little finger around mine, a tiny, electrifying gesture that sent my heart racing. I tried to regain my composure, asking him coolly what he wanted. He smirked and uttered a single, audacious word that promised everything. Before I knew it, I was in his arms, his forwardness a shocking contrast to his innocent, college kid appearance. In the hotel room, he'd stripped my suit from my body with practiced ease and taken my throat between his teeth, a bite that was both gentle and claiming. The dim light cast shadows across his face, making his expression unreadable. A fire ignited in me, licking through my veins until all reason was consumed. In a final moment of clarity, I told him I didn't do messy. He knelt between my legs, his fingers on my belt buckle, and assured me he was clean. So I'd let him. He had been inexperienced, fumbling with the condom wrapper, but his physical attributes more than compensated for it. It had been a near-perfect night, aside from him being unable to stop when I was exhausted. The next morning, I'd left him a check for $10,000, feeling generous but not foolish. That was only a year ago. He had been relentless, charming his way from a one-night stand into my life, becoming the devoted puppy I had mistaken for a loyal companion. Now, looking at his bruised face, I had to admit, a part of me still found it beautiful. I told him with cold sincerity that he should consider acting. A face like his, an ability to feign such deep emotion, it was a rare talent. I wondered where Leo had found such a potent weapon. I conceded defeat. As I tried to step over him, he lunged, wrapping his arms around me. The world spun, and I found myself pinned to the kitchen floor, his hand cushioning my head from the impact. I didn't want another trip to the hospital. He hovered over me, his breathing growing ragged, his eyes turning red. I told him if he wanted a fight, he shouldn't resort to ambushes. I worried he might have an asthma attack and die on top of me. After a long, tense silence, he started fumbling with the buttons of my shirt. Primal animal. I grabbed his wrist, ready to snap it. I told him there was no pleasure in sleeping with another man and that he shouldn't force himself. He hadn't said a word in my defense when his friends had used those same sentiments to mock me. He let out a low, relieved laugh. He claimed that those weren't his words, that his friends were just spouting nonsense and I shouldn't listen. He took my other hand, his grip firm. He promised to bring them all back for me to beat until I was satisfied. He then nuzzled my hand, a gesture of supplication. The feeling was indescribable. It was like admiring a beautiful porcelain vase in a museum, only to realize up close that it was shattered and glued back together. Watching something I once cherished rot before my eyes was a bitter reminder of my own poor judgment. I had no desire to talk to him anymore, not since I'd overheard the truth of his deception. But the mad dog wouldn't let me up. I sighed, complaining that he was hurting me. His eyes lit up. He nuzzled my shoulder like a fluffy cat, his voice full of glee. He said he was hungry. I pretended not to understand, telling him I was hungry too. He paused for a moment, then helped me up, his arms wrapping around me from behind. He whispered for me to wait, that he'd make me a bowl of pasta. I nodded and he let me go. I had 3 days until my flight. I had no more time to waste on him. I went to my room and locked the door. I only emerged when the food delivery app notified me that my order was outside. A steaming bowl of pasta sat on the dining table. Caleb was sitting there, glaring at the takeout containers as if they contained poison. He forced a smile when he saw me, offering to throw out the delivery food because it was unhealthy. I rushed to protect my buffalo wings. I told him his cooking was terrible. The smile vanished from his face. He stammered that I used to love it. Of course I did. Back then, the mere fact that he cooked for me was enough to make me ecstatic. I would have eaten rat poison and complimented the flavor. I ignored him and focused on my meal. When I was part of the Sterling family, such greasy, indulgent food was forbidden. The family's rules were so strict they probably reprimanded stray dogs for improper posture. But now I was free, the family's disgraced failure, and no one was watching. It was liberating. Caleb sat across from me, methodically peeling the meat from the wings. It was a pointless, annoying gesture. The best part was sucking the spicy sauce off the bone. He was wasting my food. I'd bought 2 pounds, and everything he touched was ruined, but I savored the rest. Full and content, I got up to leave just as the doorbell rang. This place, which I once happily called our home, was a private sanctuary. I had no friends, so very few people even knew of its existence. My first instinct was to look at Caleb with suspicion. He offered a gentle smile, telling me not to worry. He said it was just the guys who'd insulted me here to apologize. The man was delusional, truly believing an apology could fix this. He thought I was just angry. The door opened to reveal the 3 men from the lounge, a pathetic-looking trio with bandaged heads, arms in slings, and one even leaning on a crutch. I had taken on all 3 of them. I was still in good form. A small laugh escaped me. Caleb, like a dog sensing a treat, immediately sidled up to me, whispering that if I wasn't satisfied, I could hit them again. I looked at the 3 of them. They were meek and submissive, a stark contrast to their arrogance in the lounge. I asked if I could do anything I wanted. Caleb's tone was indulgent. Of course, he said. The 3 men's faces fell. They looked at me with trembling fear, but none dared to protest. Caleb must have warned them. I nodded, remarking that it was generous of him to offer up his 3 lapdogs for my amusement. His expression didn't change as he said he was happy as long as I was. I held out my hand, asking for a tool, questioning if he expected me to use my bare fists. When Caleb pushed a case of liquor bottles toward me, the men finally broke. The one who was always with him spoke first, pleading that they were still injured. Before he could finish, Caleb grabbed a bottle and smashed it over his head, silencing his pleas. The other 2 were stunned into silence. I found their terrified expressions comical. They must have thought this was just a performance for my benefit, never imagining Caleb would actually turn on them. I picked up a bottle, heavier than the one from the club, and stepped toward them. They backed away, their legs weak with fear. They weren't afraid of me. They were afraid of the man behind me. I used to command that kind of fear myself. Now I was just a fox borrowing the tiger's might. How pathetic. The bottle shattered on the table, sending glass shards flying just as Leo arrived. He surveyed the chaotic scene with a frown, then walked naturally to Caleb's side. He asked what Caleb was doing, gently taking the broken bottle from his hand with a tenderness that was almost touching. Leo glanced at the 3 injured men, then at me. He said they were old friends, and while they may have spoken out of turn, my methods were excessive. I didn't say a word. I just swung another bottle and hit him with it. The sound was deeply satisfying. Leo staggered back, nearly falling before Caleb caught him. He leaned into Caleb's arms, looking fragile and wronged. Caleb instinctively frowned, stepping between us. I had already grabbed another bottle and brought it down on Caleb's head in the exact same spot. Seeing them both clutching their wounds, huddled together, they looked like a pair of tragic, star-crossed lovers. I told them coldly to get out of my house. Caleb didn't move. I pointed at the blood streaming down Leo's face. I told Caleb that if he didn't leave, his long-cherished childhood crush would bleed to death right in front of him. It was hard to describe the cascade of emotions on Caleb's face. Shock, confusion, and even a hint of terror. This was a secret that wasn't really a secret. Leo had told me himself 3 days ago. After Julian had taken me to the hospital, I'd received an audio file from an unknown number. It was a recording of Caleb's friends drinking in a lounge long ago. Caleb's voice was younger, but the adoration in it was unmistakable as he spoke about Leo. In the recording, someone joked about Caleb's pure devotion, how he was willing to seduce an old man like me just to help Leo. Another cheered for the power of a first love. They toasted him as a true romantic hero, while I was just the collateral damage, the pathetic older man he'd duped. I recognized the shirt Caleb was wearing in a photo that accompanied the file. It was one I had custom-made for him to celebrate my closing a major deal for Sterling, a deal I had wrestled away from Leo. The irony was suffocating. My boyfriend, who had praised my success, had left my celebration party early, claiming he had an important lab at the university, only to rush off to console Leo. They all knew Caleb had been in love with Leo since they were children, growing up together when Leo was being raised quietly in another city. They all knew Caleb was a troublemaker who only ever listened to Leo. They all knew the whole tragic love story. I was the only one in the dark. Now, so many of his actions made a sickening kind of sense. In the heavy silence, Caleb struggled to compose himself, trying to mask his panic with a strained smile. He demanded to know who told me. When I didn't answer, he turned on one of his friends, accusing him of leaking the secret. The man shrank back, shaking his head frantically. Leo, his face pale, clutched his head and whispered that he felt dizzy. His voice was so faint and breathy it could have elicited sympathy from a stone. Caleb hesitated, his gaze shifting between my impassive face and Leo's pitiable state. Finally, he made his choice. He gritted his teeth and told me to wait for him, that he would explain when he got back. Then he helped Leo out, his 3 cronies scrambling after them. As they left, they shot me looks of triumphant contempt, as if Caleb not choosing me in this twisted dilemma would leave me heartbroken. It was all so absurd. I had texted Leo and asked him to come over precisely so he would take Caleb away. I didn't want the rabid dog anymore. I changed the keypad code on the door and spent some time cleaning up the wreckage. I had to leave a good impression for potential buyers. I also returned the unopened cases of liquor Caleb had bought. It was good stuff and fetched a nice price. A strange, desolate calm settled over me as I worked. Hitting Leo had been a calculated move, partly for my own satisfaction, and partly to give him a reason to keep Caleb occupied. A wounded childhood flame would surely require constant attention. Thanks to Leo, I had 2 days of peace. I threw away what was useless and sold what had value. By the end, I realized that after living in this city for 31 years, I could carry all my remaining possessions in a single suitcase. On my last day, Caleb returned. More accurately, he discovered the code had been changed and started making a scene outside my door until I was forced to let him in. He looked disheveled, and the faint scent of hospital disinfectant clung to him. The moment he was inside, he pushed me onto the sofa, his eyes blazing through his messy hair. He demanded to know why I had put the condo up for sale. I hadn't tried to hide it, but his intense, agonized reaction was unexpected. I told him plainly that it was none of his business. When I'd first bought the place, infatuated and naive, I'd wanted to put his name on the deed. He had refused. Thank God for that. My 4 simple words made him take a sharp breath. The hands on my shoulders tightened, the veins on his knuckles standing out in sharp relief. He was fighting for control. His gaze was intense, as if trying to read my very soul. As his breathing deepened, I slowly moved my free hand, preparing to strike his carotid artery if he made a move. All my essential documents were on my person. I could be gone in minutes. But before I could act, he grabbed my searching hand and pulled me to my feet, his fingers forcing their way between mine. He smiled, a strange, tender gesture. He told me he hadn't come back for 2 days because he was getting the rings. I then noticed the simple platinum band on his ring finger. It wasn't professionally made. I had crafted it myself. I cursed Leo internally for being so useless. He had lied, sending me daily updates about how Caleb was dutifully caring for him at the hospital, lulling me into a false sense of security. The idiot was completely worthless. Caleb held up my hand, sliding the matching ring onto my finger. He admired them, 2 simple bands glowing under the lights, a look of blissful contentment on his face. He told me he was wrong about everything before. He said that after Sterling Enterprises was returned to Leo, we could live our own lives peacefully. He spoke without waiting for a response. He mentioned he had money, that his family's assets were elsewhere. He said once he graduated, he'd take me to his family home. He dismissed his friends as loudmouths and promised to cut them out of his life if I didn't like them. He begged me not to be angry, swearing he would never lie to me again. He spoke of his deception so lightly, as if his promise of a happy future would be enough for me to joyfully forget everything and hand over the company I had built. His question of okay was rhetorical. The possibility of my refusal had clearly never crossed his mind. As he spun his fantasy of our future, I looked at him and said, calmly, "No, I'm not willing. Caleb, I am not a recycling center for your mistakes. Your goal is achieved. I was outplayed and I accept that. So, Sterling belongs to Leo. I have nothing more to say about it. Though I doubt that fool can keep it afloat for long without resorting to such underhanded tactics. But for me to live happily ever after with a liar? I'm sorry, but I haven't sunk to your level." The synthetic smile on his face froze and then dissolved. The shift was instantaneous. Before I could react, he seized my arm and crushed me against him in an embrace that felt more like a python coiling around its prey. His chest vibrated with a cold rage that shattered the fragile pretense of harmony. His voice was a low growl. So he knew about the ticket to Paris. He wanted to know if I was planning to leave without him. He must have been busy the past 2 days, flying to retrieve the rings and investigating my plans. And I had foolishly pinned my hopes on Leo to keep him occupied. Caleb tightened his grip, demanding to know why I was silent. He threw my past words back at me. My declarations of love, my willingness to give up everything for him, my promises of forever. I had meant every one of those words when I said them. Now, hearing them from his lips made my stomach turn. I didn't understand his sudden, desperate attachment, but my flight was the next afternoon. I had no power now, and I didn't want any more complications. I restrained the urge to slap him. I said that he had lied to me. He stiffened. I asked him if I didn't have a right to be angry. He loosened his grip slightly, studying my face. I kept my expression neutral under his searing gaze. He pulled me into another hug, the tension in his jaw releasing. A flurry of desperate kisses landed on my cheeks, my brow, my lips. I endured it, forcing myself not to push him away, telling myself it was just a stray dog licking me. When he was finally sated and reached for my shirt buttons, I pushed him away. No. He laughed softly, content, and held me close, murmuring that he knew I couldn't bear to part with him. He said he would go to Paris with me tomorrow to make amends, to buy me anything I wanted. I said nothing. I knew he would invent whatever answer he needed to hear. Sleeping in his arms was repulsive, but I knew the next day would be a battle, so I forced myself to rest. In the twilight of sleep, I felt hot breath and trembling kisses, his lips mumbling against mine, a confusing mix of apology and desire. He whispered that he didn't know he would fall for me so hard. He pleaded for my forgiveness, confident that I would grant it, because I loved him so much. He repeated it, a desperate chant. I had to forgive him or he wouldn't be able to bear it. Forgiveness. He truly didn't know me at all. Caleb was in high spirits the next day, packing his suitcase to accompany me to Paris. My performance must have been convincing. It was only at the private terminal at O'Hare, when Julian and Marcus appeared, that the illusion shattered. He was still trying to explain things to me, claiming his feelings for Leo were a misunderstanding of a life debt, promising we'd have nothing to do with them in the future. When Marcus's security team moved in, Caleb tried to shield me, telling me to run while he held them off. He never finished the sentence. I kicked him hard in the back, sending him sprawling and knocking his phone from his hand. It skittered across the polished floor. Pinned to the ground, Caleb's eyes were wild with fury and betrayal. He stared at me, his hand reaching desperately for my pant leg, a picture of pathetic anguish. He cried out my name, his voice cracking. I stood beside Julian while Marcus stood between us like a mountain, looking down at Caleb with contempt. He asked if this was the lowlife I'd told him about. The moment I nodded, Caleb exploded with rage, lunging at Marcus and screaming about who the hell he thought he was. One of Marcus's men expertly subdued him again with a sharp blow to the stomach that cut off his curses. He was left gasping on the floor, his eyes filled with hatred for Marcus. He told him he could have anything he wanted, as long as he didn't harm me. Marcus let out a cold laugh and pointed at me. He told Caleb he was still deluding himself, that the only one who had ever hurt me was him. Caleb didn't look at me. His voice was a raw, gravelly whisper. He pleaded, telling me I wouldn't leave him. I looked down at him, my face a mask of indifference. I told him that from the moment I heard the truth outside that lounge, there was no love left, only hate. I asked him if he knew why he and Leo had grown up together. It was because I am a vengeful person, and I had systematically destroyed the lives of my father's mistress and her son, forcing them out of the city. Marcus clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. He said that was to be expected from the heir to the sterling fortune, noting that my only flaw seemed to be a poor choice in men. He looked at Caleb as if he were trash on the sidewalk, then wrapped an arm around Julian. He told his husband it was time to go, that with me on board, he'd have much more time for him. I stepped past Caleb, ready to leave. He lunged again, his captured wrist twisting at an unnatural angle to break free. He tackled me to the ground, his hand cushioning my head. He draped himself over me like a dog guarding its food, absorbing the blows from the security guards without a sound, his jacket shielding me from the chaos. I could only hear the sickening thud of fists on flesh and Caleb's muffled groans. Then I heard Marcus's exasperated voice, marveling at Caleb's strength even with a broken wrist. After a moment, his tone turned venomous, saying he wouldn't waste any more time on this, that he could just as easily wipe out Caleb's entire family. He ordered them to finish it, but the commotion outside grew louder. When I was pulled to my feet, Caleb's own security team had arrived, creating a tense standoff. My heart sank. Caleb stood, his face a cold mask of fury, and told Marcus that anyone who tried to take me from him would die. One of his men, however, clearly recognized Marcus and whispered something urgently to Caleb. Caleb slapped the man across the face and snatched the gun from his holster, pointing its black, hollow eye steadily at Marcus. I never imagined he would go this far. I stepped in front of Marcus. Whatever this was, they were innocent bystanders. Caleb's hand was shaking violently, but his expression was murderous, his voice a desperate plea. He begged me to come to him. I shook my head. I told him everything that needed to be said was said. He didn't know me, and I had clearly never known him. We were not people who could ever find common ground. I sighed, admitting that if I still had my power, and if he wasn't the heir to his own powerful family, he would be the one with a bullet in him. Marcus, standing behind me with Julian, had the audacity to applaud. He said it was well said, and then he offered me a pistol as casually as if it were a bag of chips. He remarked that he was going to handle it himself, but felt it would be more cathartic for me to do it. Sometimes I thought Marcus was just as unhinged as Caleb. He smiled, telling me that if I didn't shoot, this fool would spend the rest of his life thinking he had a chance at redemption, and asked if I wanted to be haunted by him forever. I aimed the gun at Caleb. He still held his own weapon, but as I raised mine, he lowered his and took a step forward. His smile was a tragic, broken thing. He begged me to come back with him, promising he was wrong and that he would change. He wouldn't. His words were cut off by the crack of the gunshot. It was almost funny. The last thing I saw in his beautiful eyes before he fell was a welling of tears, a look of utter disbelief as he stared at me, his lips moving without a sound. His bodyguards swarmed him. I calmly reassured them that I had been precise. He wouldn't die, but they needed to get him to a hospital immediately. They carried him away, heading in the opposite direction from me. On the plane, as we ascended through the clouds, Julian handed me a glass of warm water, telling me it would help. A moment later, he offered a tissue. I unfolded it slowly and pressed it to my face until it was soft and damp. When I opened my eyes, the world was clear again. I felt the need to explain that I wasn't crying for him. I was crying for a love I had invented, and for finding myself utterly alone at 31. Julian nodded. He said I was also crying for my own rebirth. He told me Paris was a city of new beginnings, and that an interesting artist he knew online was arriving in a few days. He wanted to introduce us. Seeing my hesitation, he clarified that he wasn't trying to set me up. He just wanted to show me that love isn't everything, and it doesn't always have to be the first choice. The sun broke through the clouds, brilliant and blinding. I nodded, and in that moment I chose a new life. And then what happened? Ben asked, a piece of steak still hanging from his lips. I rolled my eyes. You know what happened? Ben chewed thoughtfully. No, the story in Chicago was that you were the one who couldn't let go. that you chased Caleb to the airport and got hurt in a fight. That was Marcus's doing. He didn't want to deal with the fallout from Caleb's family, so he spun a convenient lie. Caleb's side never corrected it, so the rumor became fact. Ben looked stunned. Damn, the gossip mill is toxic. I really thought you were a hopeless case like me, just chasing after someone who didn't want you. Turns out you're way tougher. There was no need for comparison. Julian had been right. We were both just people who loved earnestly. And people like that shouldn't be made to suffer. After clearing the plates, Ben pulled back the curtains. That psycho is still downstairs, he said with a sigh. Are you still going for your walk? I shrugged. Of course. Ben was exasperated. When is he finally going to disappear? I stroked my chin. Soon. After Caleb had stormed back into the Chicago business world, he'd been a shark in a feeding frenzy, tearing chunks out of his rivals, including Leo's Sterling Enterprises. He'd alienated nearly every powerful family in the city. Then, he tried to sign his entire new company over to me. Ben always thought I was just Caleb's executive assistant, putting up with his presence for a handsome salary. That wasn't the truth. As much as Caleb repulsed me personally, he was a brilliant predator in the boardroom. Having someone like that manage my assets and funnel profits my way was an arrangement I was more than happy to accept. But his usefulness was nearing its end. I had recently met a painter, 5 years my junior, with an infectious smile. It seemed I had a type. He'd pursued me for 2 weeks, and after a couple of dates, I found myself genuinely interested. Tonight's dinner with Ben was a celebration of my second spring. Ben gave me a knowing look. When are you going public? Aren't you worried he'll lose it again? I shrugged. I don't care. If he tries anything, I have plenty of ways to deal with him. Years ago, I had said it myself. I am a vengeful person with a very long memory. I was simply bitten by a dog midway through my life. It hurt, but the wound had healed. The world was full of beauty and excitement, and I had a magnificent life to live.